You might think that the end of the NWSL season is a break for teams completely, but you would be mistaken. The chaos is just starting. Well, that's because the NWSL just released their new rules for the 2024 expansion draft with two new teams, Bay FC and Utah Royals FC. So we're going to be talking about the rules, what's going on, and future things to look out for. Let's get into it. First, we're going to talk about why exactly this is all happening. Well, if you've watched my previous videos, you know that the NWSL is rapidly expanding. Since we have these new teams, they need to acquire players, and the NWSL makes this transition equitable for all teams through allowing these new teams to pick certain players from existing teams. But there are obviously rules to characterize that and make it as fair as possible, and those are the 7 rules we're going to be talking about right now. I'm going to group some of these 7 rules to make it a little easier to understand. So coming up with number 1, we have that a team is permitted to protect a total of 9 players and all other players must be unprotected. This means that core players the team finds essential can be locked and the new team cannot pick them as part of the draft. In addition to this, a team is permitted to protect 1 additional player after the first expansion team selects a player from its roster. That means if one of their unprotected players gets picked, they can add another player to their protected list. After this, we have that under 18 players are not eligible to be selected in the expansion process, and that players with a no trade clause are required to be protected by their current club. We also have that individuals on the discovery list of any team are not eligible to be in the expansion draft. Basically, a discovery player is a professional, amateur, domestic, or international player who is just not under a current contract with the NWSL, but an NWSL club may claim her rights by adding her to their discovery list, and those players are not allowed to be picked in the draft. Teams are also required to disclose to the league, along with the protected designation, any players who they believe will not be able to play by January 1st, 2024. This could be for injury, loan, retirement, or any other reason, and that information will be passed on to the expansion teams. Lastly, we have that unsigned, unrestricted, and restricted free agents are not eligible to be selected in the expansion process. Now, this could be somewhat of a strategy because people are talking about the fact that if a team doesn't sign one of their free agents before, they don't have to use space on their protected list and they can sign them after December 15th, which is when the draft is, and therefore still get the player. Now that we've talked about abstract rules, let's get into more of the specifics of what's happening right now. Just today, both Bay FC and Utah Royals made their first signings for the season, with Alex Loera being signed by Bay FC for $175,000 and protection from the expansion draft, which means that Bay FC can't sign any more Kansas City players. In addition to this, Utah Royals acquired midfielder Michaela Clough from Orlando Pride for an allocation fee of $90,000 and expansion protection. Bay FC also made another move as part of the pre-expansion draft, which means they got Orlando's 8th overall pick in the 2024 NWSL College Draft in exchange for $50,000 and expansion protection. This makes Orlando the first team to be immune from the expansion draft because both teams have expansion protection clauses. This means that none of their players can be taken. Lastly, I wanted to make a quick comment about how this draft might go. This year has a record level of free agents. There are 75 total players, and that list has some really hot players like Tierna Davidson, Crystal Dunn, Mallory Swanson, Emily Sonnet, Rose Lavelle. The list goes on. These are players that every team wants. So, as I mentioned in Rule 7, if these teams opt to only sign them later, they A, don't have to include them in their protected player list, but B, they can't be drafted as part of the expansion draft. I foresee this being used quite a bit. Ultimately, while I do believe having some strategy going into this expansion draft is important, I also think that it's not all about poaching players. Each new team can get no more than 2 unprotected players per existing team, and each expansion team may select up to 12 players maximum. I think it's really just to give them a start as they approach this new season. This video was a little shorter than normal, but I hope it was informative. We talked about the rules of the NWSL expansion draft, the most recent information, and strategies that teams might potentially use as we go forward. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and like the video, and watch out for future videos where I give you even more recent updates and my predictions for the 2024 season. Thank you.